So this week's going to be a little bit different. I had the opportunity to sit down with some local Austin pros at Bella by Sara's new floral studio in Dripping Springs, and we did a quick Q&A and just had the opportunity to kind of network and get pampered and spray tans and manicures and makeup retouch-ups, and a really great lineup of folks just to get together.
I'm gone out of my mind. Wake me up when I can't go outside.
Thank you guys so much for coming. This is Kylie Weiss of Maldine, and this is Sara Mulder of Bella by Sara. Kylie is an amazing luxury invitation designer and brander. You work with clients all over the world, mostly domestically, but you're amazing. And then this is Sara. This is her space. And
it's so beautiful. Thank you for hosting.
Oh no, thank you everybody for being here. I'm so happy to have you here. You guys cannot imagine. So, and thank you for you being here. Okay, go. Okay, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself. She's our special guest. So tell us about yourself and your business.
Yes. Okay, so I own a company called Maldine. I have a background in education in branding. So I was branding small creative businesses back in 2007. I essentially got asked to brand a wedding, which I thought was interesting, and that led to us launching Maldine in 2008. Our focus has always been on not only working with planners and designers to brand every guest touch point, which obviously relates into stationery. So a lot of what we do is the tangible stuff guests see, save the dates, invitations. We'll do wall murals, we'll do help with welcome bags, anything that the guest is like experiencing. One of our focuses is unusual materials, so we've always challenged ourselves with terracotta and wood and acrylics, and how are we creating something that guests have never seen before. We work with artisans all over the world to produce the stuff that we do, and we now only work on about 15 weddings a year, and most of them are working directly with planners. I love what I do. And then I have a partnership with the Knot Pro. I've been traveling with them for the last 3 years. We started this concept of the Knot's always been educating couples, which is wonderful, but for all of us, we're kind of isolated. We've been by ourselves. We're trying to figure out how to run a creative business, both business side and creative, and so they launched the Knot Pro, and so I've been with them traveling city to city and educating wedding pros about what it is to have a business in the event world. It's been an adventure seeing in each market we all have the same struggles, but trends just might be a little bit different. So I think, all of us I think struggle. I'm a little bit left brain and a little bit right brain, and so it's a little hard for me to kind of turn on and off both of those sides. But we have, I definitely think it's important to kind of treat it as two different roles. And for the entrepreneur side, I think a lot of times as creatives we put a lot of pressure on ourselves for the unknowns of the business component, so I definitely recommend delegating as much as possible. For me, I found a lot of stress in like bookkeeping and doing things that were very meticulous, and I now spend like $90 a month to have a bookkeeper, and I should have done it years ago, because now I have the creative space and I have a little less pressure and stress having delegated that. So one of my focuses when I first started Maldine was to kind of hit the luxury world, and I don't know the exact numbers, but there's, a million weddings a year, and so when I actually looked at the numbers of like, okay, let's say I want to work in the 1%, so the 1% is spending X number of dollars, that still is like tens of thousands of couples across America, and so that was kind of always my target of like, how do I create an experience, and how do I relieve stress, and how do I work alongside a whole vendor team to make that a little bit easier. I definitely have done a lot of like focus on, aside from weddings, what are my couples like really focused on, what are they buying, what brands do they associate with, and kind of aligning myself in the way that those new brands that are hip or trendy or lasting like Chanel, how do I help it make it a little bit easier for them to digest the work that we do. So there's a couple different things there. One, I think when I really realized like not that I didn't need the business, but the right client was out there. I didn't need to take the wrong one. That was really like eye-opening. For me, I actually had this thing, I was like, well, if each client fits these criteria, like it was like started with 3, and then I was like, okay, actually that should be like 5 things. Like, maybe do they have, out of the 5 things, do they match 3 or 4 of them? Is it budget? Is it a planner I like working with? I think a lot of times, every planner works a little bit different, and sometimes some just bring more stress to the situation than organization, and so that's kind of the sacrifice sometimes as another vendor involved. Do they have appreciation for stationery? I think that's, if they're going to be investing that much money, are they actually going to be like, wow, this is so special to me? That's important. Location and date is important. Does it match in my calendar where I'm looking at knowing it's going to be, it's not around any other things that would make it that much more stressful, honestly. So it's kind of like I look at those things, and I have a PDF that I send them initially. So like when they send an inquiry, or a bride or a planner or designer is like, we have the right couple for you, I'll send them that and have them kind of see how we uniquely work. We compare ourselves a lot to like an interior designer for paper, so it's very collaborative. So if a couple or a planner does not want to be hands-on, we probably aren't a good fit for them, because they're going to be touching and feeling 12 different suedes to make sure that it's the right fit. And so I think it's going to be different for every vendor type, but I think finding 5 things that are like important to you that add value to your business and making sure that they fit 3 or 5 of those things. And I think, I have learned to find a list of people that I can also refer them to, because I hate telling people no. And we've all had those clients where we're like, we should have told them no. So it does make it a lot easier, because it's not always that they're a bad person, it just may not be a good fit. And so having a list of other people saying, I think you would work really well with this person and this is why, and going to things like this to network with each other, I think is helpful in kind of closing that door a little bit. So I talk a lot at the workshops across the U.S. about branding specifically. And I think a lot of times branding, people think it's what you see. It's your logo, it's your colors. And a lot of what I try to say is knowing what the experience is like working with you. And if you've not done this recently, I highly recommend it. Like, what is the experience? That's part of your brand. Who is the team that you are hiring to have work and be the front face to the other vendor pros is so important. How are you communicating? Like, what is the experience? How are you getting back to them within 24 hours? What is that automated response, or what are the words that you're using? And so I think a lot of times brands are so focused on the visual stuff and not the experience, that they're maybe not communicating as clear as they think that they are in terms of helping their brand resonate with the right people. It's so easy to find the right matches, and I just had a conversation with a videographer who's like, I've been dating vendors for years. And so he's like, I want to know right away if we're going to work really well or not together. And especially in the luxury world, most of the time I'm very removed from my couples, except for a couple key check-in points. And so really having like those friendships and those real relationships with your other vendors, I think is what's critical to making sure that you have a team that supports those luxury brands. I burn out all the time. Don't we all? So one of the things that I say about burnout, it still happens to me all the time, and it's just hard to, I don't like when people are disappointed, or, it's a very emotional world that we live in, and I think that can be emotionally exhausting. One of the things that I do is I take a personal retreat for like 2 or 3 days every 90 days. So I kind of work in 90-day segments, and so what I do is I either lock myself at the lake house, or I'll just stay home, or I'll go to a hotel, and what I'll do is kind of just look at every touch point in my business and like what's worked in the last 90 days, what's not worked in the last 90 days. And there was an example recently where we had shipped some boxes to California that had invitations in them, and there was a hiccup because they couldn't find we shipped them to an office, and they couldn't find one of the boxes, and I had no way of telling them what that box looked like. We hadn't taken a photo of it, and so that was one of the things in the 90-day review that I was like, okay, from now on when a box ships, we're taking photos of it and attaching it to that email, so that if there is any confusion, now they know that they're looking for a 12 by 12 square box. And so for me, I guess allowing that space for me to grow and refine every 90 days and giving myself grace to do that helps keep the burnout a little bit at bay, because a lot of times I'm like, okay, this brought me a lot of stress the 90 days, why and how can I fix it? And I think staying in touch every 90 days rather than letting it go on and on and on and like the issue actually getting buried, is really helpful. Ooh, wedding trends. So I'm seeing actually two different things. I'm seeing a lot of color. A lot of our luxury couples are doing like a ton of color, like even mustards and bright fuchsias and or maybe reds or like just bright surprise delight colors. Or they're going very moody, very dark. We're working on several like all black suites, which it's been years since a couple was like, yes, I want black for my wedding, which I love. So I definitely am seeing that. I'm also seeing tradition kind of come back. We've had a lot of conversations about like, well, this is what my mother's invitation looked like, and really feeling more sentimental about, what is, we were talking about the hand binding tradition during the ceremony, like, what is that heirloom that's been through the family that they can keep forward? And so I'm seeing some of those special touch points, even developing patterns that are like on the grandparents' rug that they grew up in. Or we just did something that included terracotta and the late grandmother, the bride remembered like sleeping on the terracotta tile, and that was so important to her and what she remembered about her childhood. And so we were able to bring those touch points, and even though not everyone knows it, it was so much more of an experience for the bride to have that included and to tell that story. So I think the millennial couples are looking to like, how do I tell my story and my family's story?
Like framed something or...
Yeah, we did not. So
No,
it was
okay.
never actually, I guess, written or in writing, and I think those are also what make it so special. Is it like it is that internal, like it made her feel more connected to her grandmother on her wedding weekend by having that, and it didn't need to be shared. Another instance is we have a couple who's doing a mural backdrop, and she's doing a table of hats. And so we're just doing a sign like take a hat, but she then opened up this whole story about her grandpa used to collect hats, and she now has this whole like trunk of hats, and she wanted that to be included. So it's kind of like that. It's like they know it's special to them, but we're not seeing them actually like want to parade it around necessarily. It's kind of, I guess, because we used the terracotta we did terracotta stamped invites, and then we also did custom terracotta pieces that the guests could take home as part of kind of a gift party. Yeah. Yes. So I definitely want to know as much information as possible. So I also do not like wasted time at all. So like when we get an inquiry, like I usually am like, okay, read this PDF. If it resonates with you, if you fit our minimums, then let's hop on a quick 45-minute phone call. Usually I'm just kind of getting a pulse of what their expectations are, because as we know, a lot of times they'll be like, I want something really whimsical, and then they show you their Pinterest board and you're like, that's not whimsical. That looks like, whatever. Yeah. That's just classic. Yeah. So like I'm glad you're feeling so inspired by the word, but let's get deeper. So most of the time I can kind of like, do you mean this or do you mean this? Do you mean this? Do you mean this? And that kind of gives me a good idea, and I want to know what they want the guests to experience. And then after that, we'll put together an initial kind of mock-up of imagery. Most of the time, that imagery is not related to weddings whatsoever. That allows me to have more of a conversation, because a lot of couples are so visual that they're like, well, I don't want that. And we're like, we're not giving you that. It's like, this is, whatever. So it might be fashion, it might be interiors. We might show a swatch of like, this is what textured paper looks like. Do you like that? Just kind of little key points. Then they put down like a design investment fee, which then allows us to kind of build out a more customized approach. So we will typically pitch them, honestly, one concept with maybe one variation, and they usually are a yes, which is awesome. So hopefully by the time we've gotten to that, I know, do they like thick paper? Do they want an unusual material? Do they like big? Do they like small? So I've already asked all those questions in part of the creative process, which I think then makes the execution a little bit easier. even to the point of I will already show them variations of font styles and get their feedback. So when I propose this thing, most of the time they're like, yes, you know, right. It's brought everything, the whole story together. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So with planners, when I'm working with planners or designers, they kind of know our system already. So they kind of know our mediums to be able to weed through. Now, occasionally we will get someone who's like, yeah, we can afford that, or we want to afford that. And then they're like, let's cut back. And so then we just have to have that conversation of like, do you know what you're getting? You know, we are charging a premium for our design services. Maybe we're not a good fit. Yeah. That kind of conversation. But for the most part, if it's coming from a planner, it's pretty direct. Yeah. I've had 2 luxury clients contact me directly this year, which has been interesting. They are very high profile in New York. They both had international weddings. They did not do invitations. They did an email. And then they wanted to create every touch point that the guest experienced, from when they arrived to the hotel, to every menu, to every gift that was given to them at the end of the party, to signage on all the cars that were the transportation. And they contacted me directly. And so, one, I was like, who's your planner? But they were just simple people, for the most part. I mean, really, but in that case, that was an easy, like, they fit all 5 of the things for me. But I would say, or at least our follow through in inquiries, I mean, I would say probably, if it's just like they found us on Pinterest or Instagram, we probably are only then working with maybe 30% of them. Does that answer? A lot of no's. Yeah. Which always is like, well, I could add that in, but most of the time, I mean, I think a lot of working with a couple is like you're educating them about a wedding for the first time, and if they're not a good fit for 3 or 4 out of the 5 reasons, you're going to run into a lot of other headaches that are just not worth it. Yeah.
Tips on that.
Yeah. A few things there. One, I don't know if you have a slogan or like a mission statement. I think that's critical. Your mission statement should tie into whatever visually you're putting out there or whatever colors you're putting out there. And it shouldn't be like, we do pretty weddings. Like, it's like, what about the experience? Like, what makes you unique? And I think everyone should feel confident in their unique style and their taste and putting out what they do best. For the execution, I definitely think putting together a brand guideline is critical. I love Pinterest for the sense of like when we're working even on an event brand and needing to fine tune some things, typically we'll create like what are the words that are going to tell this story, starting there. So on your PDF you could put like what are the words that express what my brand is, and then do some color theory research and make sure that your colors are in line with what your words represent. And then moving a step further, look at imagery. Like go on Pinterest, what resonates with the style that you want to do. Putting kind of like almost a, what is it called when you do like a board, mood board? Like you're like identifying you want this car.
Oh, like a vision board.
A vision board, yeah. Like having it front in mind for you will make sure that all of your decisions reflect back to those things, which I think is really helpful. I think having other eyes, branding yourself is the absolute worst. Like if you're too attached to it, having outside eyes that can say like, this doesn't really represent you, or that's not what I was thinking, because a lot of times we're just so influenced by what's trendy right now. Having that outside voice is really important. And then absolutely critical to make sure that your lingo is on all platforms exactly the same. So your Instagram bio is the same that's on your Facebook, that you have that content somewhere on your website, because not only is it sending that consistent brand, you have a lot of people who may only see one platform, and then from an SEO perspective, Google will reward all of that. So those are like little checkup things. Yeah. But is there, in terms of execution, was there something more specific?
Like even as specific as like captions in Instagram posts, or because I feel like where we as industries, vendors fall flat is like, oh, I'm swooning over whatever, and it's like, that's such bullshit. Like, you know, like that tells me nothing about who you are or why I should hire you. So
and I definitely think having, that list of words that I said that represent your brand doesn't have to be 5. It could be 50. Yeah. And making sure that the language that you're using, like Meldene's brand's very dark and can probably come across offensive and not fluffy to a lot of people, but we're very like, we use words that are like dark, moody, mysterious, like those are words that we want intrigue, like words that have more depth, that are a little darker, that I don't think all weddings are not swoon-worthy weddings. They might be lush, or they might be decadent, or they might be, so I think finding what your language is and your voice, and of course with hashtags in Instagram, I mean, you're using them as a search engine anyway, so then thinking about how is a couple going to find me if they're potentially looking for a plan.
Yeah.
What is happening? I think the first thing that comes to mind right away is automation. I feel like I was wasting so much time in things that I was doing over and over and over and over again. Like when I got an inquiry, how was I responding to that? So we have a lot of templatized things that then we personalize a little bit further based on the client. That has been game changing. Usually you hear the negative, like what wouldn't have you done? Should I have done?
No, automation's so critical.
Yeah, it's
but
critical.
Then, like, you just hit it. It's all about contacts. It's leads. Leads. They're not going to come to you. Make 20 contacts a day. I think she'll tell you that. Like, go out, seek it. It's not within your peers. They'll support you.
I think that's one thing I love about the wedding industry is that the couples come and go. Like I'm like, goodbye, it was wonderful, I never want to see you again. But then there's also like, that is a challenge, like you then you fall in love with couples and you're like, can we keep doing this together? And so really, I think there is an ebb and flow with the wedding industry, and it has nothing to do with you if money or business is not coming in. It's 100 different facets of why that's not happening, and so always thinking about like 3 months ahead, and maybe if you're doing those 3-month evaluations, like how am I thinking about the couples that are going to be setting inquiries in the next 3 months? Because if you aren't putting out there, they're not going to come in by themselves, that's for sure. And then I think my brand, when we started Meldine, it was prior to Pinterest, so there was really no personalizations in weddings, and a lot of people really pushed back on the way our brand looked, the fact that we were using black and gray and dark colors, and I think really staying true to who I knew I wanted the business to be and what I wanted to represent for couples and feeling confident in that, I think is what has led us to be one of the top in the world in terms of what we do, because I think it shines very clearly like what we represent, and we've not really deviated. Like if you don't like black or you don't like this style, then please find someone else. Yeah. Cool. Well, this is lovely. I know you guys have spray cans and
I wanted to say thank you so much. I mean, it's been amazing having you here and be part of this event. Really.
Thank you.
Don't you wanna be